It is Friday, September 22nd, and it's a little earlier than normal. We normally come to you at 1 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock noon. This is a huge week, biggest week we've had yet, talking about the startup security notes of interest. Matt Alderman is here, the wizard of entrepreneurship, and we're going to tackle it. We're going to go a little out of order this week. We're going to start out with quick startup articles and discussions, some things to think about this week, especially as we round out the year. And then we have 11 different stories, some big moves in the world of security this week we're going to break down. And then after a brief break, we're going to be joined by Don Prezett and Tim Broom of IT Pro TV. And there's a lot there we're going to talk about and look into. So this is going to be a great show. Grab something to drink. You're going to need some refreshments for this one because we're going to break it down pretty fun. Startup Security Weekly number 56 starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by... Are you looking for a career where you can make a real difference? Accenture Security is looking for passionate, creative minds to tackle some of the biggest security threats facing us today. Innovative thinkers who want to outmaneuver cyber criminals. They're hiring specialists across the spectrum, from security strategy to cyber defense, digital identity, and application security, helping to deliver holistic solutions. If you want to use next-generation technologies and global resources to change the future of security, visit accenture.com/security careers. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Go to itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal.
All right, I know typically this is where Paul gets to refer to me as a beach bum. I think we're going to change it to sand hobo. I like that a lot better, but we've got the wizard this week, the wizard of entrepreneurship. I didn't know if, Matt, I don't know if you know you're called the wizard, but from now on in my world, you're going to be the wizard. I'd call you the wizard of value, but I think this is the third week in a row you and I have managed to be together on some Security Weekly properties. So welcome back, and I know we got a lot to dig into today.
Yeah, we do. Thanks. It's always fun when Paul or somebody misses, so I get to come on and fill in, and it's been a regular basis lately, so that's all good.
I'm digging it, so I'm glad you're here. All right, let me grab a couple announcements. We're going to see if I do a little bit better this week than I did last week. SANS Hackfest, November 13th to 20th. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. That's right outside of Washington, D.C. Hackfest is SANS' most offense-focused training event of the year. It includes the 2-day summit, 3 nights of net wars with Coinapalooza, 1 night of Cyber City missions, and a super secret challenge, all alongside 9 courses taught by their top pen test course authors and instructors. The Hackfest Summit, November 13th to 14th, is 2 days of informative and technical talks curated by SANS fellow and friend of the podcast, Ed Scudis. Paul's going to be presenting a talk, so you're going to go to this. Paul's going to present a talk, how to defend against penetration testers and win. You want to win, don't you? So you're going to go to this. Register at sans.org/hackfest17. Security Weekly listeners can save $300 off the 2-day Hackfest Summit by using the discount code hackfest17 at registration. Besides CT, besides in Connecticut, it's a day-long information security conference in Southington, Connecticut, October 7th, 2017. They have an exciting lineup of speakers and a challenging CTF waiting for you to take your best shot. Due to an incredible response, general admission tickets are currently sold out. So you got 2 ways you can make this work for you. There's a wait list available through Eventbrite, so you can sign up through that link at bsidect.org. And as tickets become available, they're going to let you know, and you're going to get a chance to jump in and get some. But the other way you can do this, and this is a way to sponsor them and help the community. They have some sponsorship packages that include tickets, and they're still available. So if you think that's you and you think that that helps, visit them, bsidesct.org. Check it out. All right, so I've already told you, we've got 11 different things we're going to talk about, but I never want to skip some of these different opportunities here to just kind of talk about startup life and other stuff. And I think what's interesting, and I love it, Matt, when you're on the program and you and I get to talk about it, because we look at value a lot. I've been having a lot more conversations with enterprise leaders. In fact, I've got a workshop coming up in Dallas in the end of October. And so if anybody else is interested, I'd be happy to talk, spend a little extra time in Dallas, because I love it down there. The enterprise is looking at a lot of stuff that we're doing. And so a lot of people say to me, well, it's startup. You guys are talking about startups. How does it impact me in the enterprise? What I would say is, when we start and we're talking about these articles in the discussion, we're looking at things around leadership. Because if you want to be successful in a startup today, leadership matters. Your ability to market, your ability to influence. But what's interesting is, if you think about the role of a modern security leader today, if you're in the enterprise, you've got to get budget. Okay, well, that's selling. You've got to deliver on your goods. You've got to build the relationships. You've got to be able to focus your team. You can't do it all. And so there's a tremendous amount of parallels between the two. And so I think, the reason that you see Matt and I bouncing between Enterprise Security Weekly and here frequently and filling in and contributing and talking about is because the two programs are really related. So when you come here, what we're going to talk about, and we're going to keep this tight because there's a lot to talk about in the world of security today. Think about this from the perspective of, how does this help me do my job better? Whether you're that enterprise security leader or you're in the startup, some of you are both. You're enterprise security leaders and you're kind of going down a startup path, or you're an investor and you want to get a better sense of how to evaluate the teams and such. That's a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So one of the first stories I pulled up this week is, how do you build successful products? And this is a number of experts that weigh in. Matt, you've got a tremendous amount of experience here. I'm going to sum it up the way I saw it. Focus, focus, focus. Like the point to it is, if you want to be good at it, you've got to be really focused on what you do. And you and I talk about this all the time, right? What's the problem you solve? What value do you create solving that? But when you look at this, if you're advising somebody today, they're trying to get something done and they want to build a product. And again, this work internal as much as external. What do you think? Did anything in this article resonate with you, or do you think we missed it and there's something people need to think about better?
Well, look, to me, it's the foundational stuff you just said, right? What's the market problem? Are there other people out in the industry trying to solve it? And then what's your value associated with that? And that starts to drive the focus. Like, what am I building? How do I enhance that value back to the market to solve that problem in a unique or different way? And I think it's a step that a lot of people skip. Truly, typical startups are going to come out. They have an idea. They see something wrong. They start building technology, and then they try to go get some traction. If they just step back a couple steps and said, okay, can I articulate the problem? Both sometimes at the market level and the technology level, but can you articulate that true problem? And then you better have an idea of why you're out trying to solve this thing and how you solve it and what makes you unique, and then drive that value. That will set your focus for everything else you do, because that means you know what you're going to communicate to the market, you know what you're going to attempt to build and really kind of rally around from a value proposition. And it really sets that tone, right? And I think that's a step that a lot of people just skip up front sometimes. And to me, that's the starting point. And obviously that's the work I've been doing lately with some of these startups, is just kind of going back to the basics, laying out a base structure. It's not super difficult, by the way. And once you get it, things start to click. You're like, oh, yeah, that's what we need to do. And then you can focus the rest of your activities from there.
Yeah, I find too, when people get to that point, and I'll give you a quick example, and you certainly come across this as well. I did some work here in the state of South Carolina. A lot of people in our country and in the world are saying, well, how do we get more students involved in cybersecurity? What do we need to do? And so if you talk to a lot of people in security, they'll say, well, the problem is teachers don't know what they're doing. We don't have enough teachers. We need to pay teachers more, right? And so I had people say this, and I said, well, has anybody asked the teachers what the problem is? And they said, no, that's a good idea. Hey, we've got a meeting with a bunch of teachers. Why don't you come to it? So I did some keynote. And actually, in fact, what I did instead of the keynote was I said, if you guys want to hear me talk, I'm happy to. But would it be cool if we just kind of asked questions and had a conversation? They said, sure. So I kind of described what everybody else said to them, and I could watch their eyes. And I said, okay, you guys tell me what the problem was. And I was not surprised, but what I found was the problem wasn't that they didn't feel that they were paid enough. The problem wasn't that they didn't feel that they got support or they didn't know how to do it or they didn't know security. Their problem was actually really simple. They didn't have the buy-in that they needed from their executives. So the principals and the supervisors and the other people in that chain didn't understand why we'd be teaching school in a high school and what that would, or security rather, in high school, and what that would mean and what kind of risk they would have. Number two, they pointed this out, and this was shocking. This might be more to South Carolina. Most of the technical security stuff is in a technical track, what we used to call VOTech when I was a kid. I don't know what they call it anymore. It's fancy now. But the point is, if you're an honor student, you're almost excluded from this particular track, which seems exceptionally counterintuitive to me. Number three, parents don't understand it. If you say, hey, I want little Johnny to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, people get that. Hey, I want him to do security stuff. Wait, he wants to be a hacker? Is he going to get in trouble for that? I don't think so. Or or he's not my kid or whatever. Those were the problems. It's not at all what anybody said. It's not this. We've got to figure out how to get businesses to create money, or we need to go train these teachers. That wasn't the problem. That's not a problem at all. And we've spent so much time and effort telling ourselves what the problem was, that when we actually went to the people that were on the front lines that were trying to solve the problem and asked them where they needed help, it was far easier to solve. Well, I'm not sure we solved it. It was far easier to understand. I think that's your point. People get excited, they get spun up, they've got a very limited perspective, they get good with it. And I think when people realize, gosh, if you just ask people, they'll tell you. And if you can get good at that, then it makes everything easier. But there's this one other part it has in here, and I'm curious how you handle this, Matt. It says, so the advice is you say no to one-off customizations as you move up market. Paul and I have talked about this a couple of times, so I'm curious your take on it. So you've got a product, you're excited, you're getting your traction, you've got your customers in, and then somebody says, oh, can you make it work this way, or can you do this? And at first blush, I mean, they're throwing money at you, and they're a good customer, and you don't want to lose them, and you want their testimonial. And so you kind of go, oh, okay, we can do that. How do you help companies handle that? How do you help them figure out how to build a product that's good for a lot of people without getting into too many one-offs that really don't have a return? Is there any ideas or strategies that people need to think about when they get in this pattern?
Yeah, it gets interesting, right? Because as a startup, you're under pressure to get those first customers on, and sometimes you have to do some customization to get that initial proof point or proof points, right? What you want to try to do, sometimes this is easier said than done, which is one-offs are something that are configurable that you can somehow isolate from the rest of the core code, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you meet that requirement through a customization that you can feature flag turn off and not expose to anybody else that doesn't divert the entire product? Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes that's not very hard, depending on what it is. As you get later and later stage in a company and you're building out a broader customer base, doing one-offs gets really, really tough, because it can divert resources from going after a much broader market. And it's been a challenge everywhere. I mean, Tenable had this with the federal government stuff, right? There's a lot of requirements that FedGov wanted to put onto the platform. Those are things that we had to do that were really one-offs for the U.S. federal government, not for the rest of the customers. So as long as you can isolate that code or leverage it for commercial use elsewhere, great. But it is a hard balance at times to do that. The way we used to try to do it when I did control path and some of the other stuff was we tried to do that through configurations and make that a little easier to deal with those one-offs through a configuration, not through custom code. That way you're not kind of affecting the core platform code. You do it through like a database configuration or something like that. So
I like that.
Those would be recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because one of the things that I've noticed is the startups that tend to focus, right? They find their niche, and that may mean even a particular industry. So, you're really good at hospital tech or whatever. Good, go own that. But I watch a lot of them get really nervous, and they say, but we could be bigger, and if all I do is focus on that, then won't I box myself out of all these others? And what I always try to explain is if you can go get really good at one, you have so much evidence and proof that expanding out to the next one makes sense. But I like your approach. If we can get people to think about, the modularity of it and configurations, then they're not necessarily coding themselves into a black hole. So
Right. Don't hard code it, right? So perfect example, PCI, right? If you hard code everything to PCI, guess what? It's going to be really, really hard to change it. But if you created a base structure that allowed you to do PCI through configuration and then, I want to do it for some other regulation, for example, then you've got the core capabilities there. Now it's a customization. It's content driven, not custom code driven. And that sometimes it's still a challenge for startups, the custom code route versus the configuration route, because to do it right in configuration means you have to spend a little more time building the right underlying architecture, but then it gives you the flexibility to continue to expand.
It's kind of paradoxical, right? Doesn't that mean then, Matt, you've got to better understand the problem you're trying to solve? Like you've got to really understand the problem so you code for the problem, but leave the branches.
And maybe the target customer and the buyer persona and yeah,
right. The stuff we like to skip over because it's less sexy for a lot of people. I threw this article in, hiring for discipline you know a little about. It's got 3 ideas. I wanted to call out one I really liked. So the idea is, all right, so you're a startup and I need different things, right? I need sales, I need marketing. These are things I never liked, especially if you're in security, but I also might need development. I'm not a developer. I need all these different types of things. And one of the things that was suggested, and this is a personal favorite of mine, which is do the jobs yourself. Go figure it out. I mean, there's no substitute for experience, and there's no substitute for experience when it really matters. So if you've never sold, learning how to sell, it's a valuable experience. That doesn't mean you need to be a salesperson, but understanding it. But here's the advice I would have for this in specific. If you're going to go learn how to sell, go learn how to sell. Go take a course. Go get some books. Go understand it. There's a process and a methodology to it, and there's a number of different ones. Pick the one you like. Each of them has some level of merit, but that's going to help you understand what works for you and your company, and then you have that firsthand experience, so you're going to be slightly better positioned now when you interview somebody else to replace you. You know what it's like. You know what it's going to be like for them. But you also know the questions you need to ask. Maybe you can figure out how to hire for the things you didn't do as well. I like that. Second one it talks about is enlisting experts. So you go and asking for help. And then the third one is, just hire entry-level people and see how it works out and pull them up. I like that one the least, even in security, right? Because the thing I look at here is I think it works in security. And I keep seeing so many security teams in general just going, I need a security, right? What do we hear? I need a unicorn. They've got to be able to do all these things. They've got to have 10 years of experience, but they got to be willing to work for a first-year entry-level salary. And it's like, wait, what? And what I find is a lot of the folks running these teams don't actually know how to accomplish those jobs. And I think if we could start to narrow down a little bit better what you actually expect somebody to do, and you had some experience with that, you're going to know really quick if that person can fit your environment or not, or ask people. But again, that clarity, right? To me, this is still saying what problem are you trying to solve? And if you just spitball it, sales. What kind of sales, right? I don't know if we talked about this on air or not, but last week you and I, Matt, talked about is it direct sales? Is it channel sales? Are you working with the enterprise or the SMB? It's all different sales. Are you selling a product? Are you selling a service? Are you selling both? All totally different ways of doing stuff. How do you think about this when you're looking to hire somebody? If it's something that maybe you don't have as much direct experience with, although I think you're pretty broad in terms of your experience. Advice for somebody else?
Yeah, well, a couple of the recommendations in here are interesting, and I kind of agree with you on the third point because it kind of productive to one of the other articles you have later, right? Which is hire entry-level folks and see how it goes. Look, if you've been in the role, if you've done the role, even in somewhere back in your past, you have some level of experience of how you want to hire for the role. And in an early stage startup, look, founders are doing a lot of stuff, right? They're out doing sales, they're out doing initial marketing, they're out doing investor raises. They're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none in the earliest of days. They can't focus on one specific thing necessarily. And so having gone out and talked to customers about your message and the sales and is there interest gives you an idea of, hey, these are the types of customers we're seeing. These are the types of interests we have. So when I go out and hire a salesperson, look, I kind of know what customers are looking for. So let me find somebody that, can really help us accelerate those kinds of areas. I actually did an interview yesterday with a sales leader for one of the companies I'm consulting with now. And to me, it all boils down about culture, right? You've got some sales executives that want to go out and put territory managers and SEs all over the place and drive a big sales team. You have others that are fully on board with self-service models to say, hey, I'd love people to get on the platform really, really easy, and then I'll figure out how to cross-sell, upsell them, right? Those are two different philosophies from a sales perspective. And if you haven't experienced aspects of that, it'll be hard for you to find the right sales leader to bring into your organization. So fully agree. On the less experienced side, I don't know. To me, you've got to bring in. We talked about this last week, the advisor stuff, right? I think we talked about advisors versus mentors.
Yep.
Leverage advisors where you can in the early days, right? That's some of the work that I'm doing. And if you look at some of these startups, they're bringing in other industry advisors, kind of experts, to help with some of the guidance early on. But when you go to hire people, I like bringing in somebody senior who's been there, done that, can do the work, can get things going. Once you get traction, then you can start to hire out the rest of the team. And that's when you can bring in some less experienced people to kind of mentor and teach through the process. But I think if you don't nail things like go-to-market and sales approaches early with someone who's been there, done that, you're going to burn a lot of cash before you get any traction in the industry. Yeah, it's huge.
Yep, and it's a fantastic segue to the next one, and I'm curious, and I'm actually curious if you think this is the most important startup question. You and I have talked a lot we're about to transition to this. There are some of the companies we're going to cover today. They've had some pretty interesting raises in terms of debt versus seed versus debt versus rounds versus A versus A again, and there's a lot there, and there's a bunch that we're going to cover in it. So here's their question: when do we run out of money? And are we on track to reach the milestones that we need for successful financing before then? And now, again, you've got a lot of experience here. I like the way that they just kind of broke this down, and they basically said, look, you're either searching for your product market fit, right? So that's your early stage. You're trying to get to that. I would usually say your unit economics, but you're trying to figure out how to be profitable and repeatable. And that's your A/B stage, and then you scaling the business, and that's your growth stage. That's when it's okay. We're good and we know how it works. Now we're going to go make it happen. And so they kind of cover some of the risks in here. I think it's a great question. I mean, especially if you're taking funding, are you doing the right stuff, and do you have enough money to get you to the next round? What do you think? Is there a better question to ask, or do you like the way this laid it out?
Close. I have one slight change in the flow. Look, early on, you're trying to get kind of that solve that market problem and try to say, hey, do I have something here that's unique and differentiated? And seed rounds are really good at, I think, doing aspects of that is getting some early traction, right? So a seed round's good to get, the initial founders, a few developers in the corner, and start to build out a product that you can POC and you can start to get momentum around. And once you get some market traction, it's like, okay, now I need to figure out how to get more traction. And so I wouldn't worry about profitability at this stage, which was kind of your phase 2. It's more about, okay, I got to start to scale up the business to start to go capture more and more of this market. At some point down the road, profitability comes into play. I don't know that it comes in kind of at phase 2 for an A/B round. A/B rounds to me are really growth rounds where you've got market validation. Now you're ready to go out, hire aspects of the team to get the message out, to get the sales going, start to get that revenue growth. Don't worry about profitability at this stage. Not quite yet. As you get into later rounds, B's and C's, now you got to start thinking about potential exit and IPOs and other things. And then profitability, I think, does start to come on the radar screen. But I wouldn't worry about profitability too early yet, because you've got to get some of that initial market traction and growth. And I don't want, really, you don't want to worry about profitability that early in the process.
No, I'm actually really glad you brought that up too, because one of the things that we've bounced around for the last year on is, does profitability matter? And it's becoming one of those things where you get a hardcore group of people who say no. You get a hard group of people who say yes. And I find myself kind of in the middle going, well, it depends. And as I was listening to you talk about it, I agree with everything you said. I mean, if you're figuring out product market fit, you've got a appropriate seed round, you're into your A round. Yeah, profitability is probably not as important. What I would say is, you need to show that you can be profitable, right? As opposed to, right? So just burning
Right.
cash, right? Throwing cash on the ground and lighting that on fire, that's not going to get anybody anywhere. But to
Mm-mm.
your point, turning an actual profit versus here's our pathway to profitability, here's when it's going to work, and here's why, right? Here's why our unit economics are going to support that. And, PS, it's going to take us 2 more years to get there. I think that that's a play in a lot of places. But that also means that you understand your unit economics and you understand your cash rate and you understand there's all sorts of numbers that we've covered at different points to be able to calculate out based on lifetime value of customer and cost of acquisition, and even when and how they pay and how you're financing everything. That'll drive a lot of those decisions for you. I'll be candid. I find a lot of startups don't know that, and if you don't know that, then you better be profitable because that's the only way you're going to survive.
Yeah, well, you have to understand burn rates, right? You have to understand I've got cash, and as I hire, I'm burning cash. And then I should be offsetting some of that burn with revenue as revenue comes in the door. And so at some point, you start to see where your burn rates start to decrease and then eventually shift the other way where you're starting to turn to profitability. And that doesn't have to happen day one, doesn't even have to happen a year from now. Look, there's a lot of companies that have gone public without profitability.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So look, some people will tell you, I'll trade a point of margin for a point of growth any day of the week. That works to an extent, don't get me wrong. But if you're going to go into the public market, here's where I shift. If you're a startup and you understand when you can hit profitability and you're accelerating capturing market at high growth rates and you're in a strategic acquisition, profitability doesn't necessarily matter. Okay. It's okay because
Agreed.
they're
Yeah.
buying you for the growth and the market share and some of those things. If you're going public, then I think profitability starts to matter. And the perfect example I have is Qualys versus Rapid7. If you look at market valuations, look, Qualys has slower growth but profitable. They were profitable when they entered the market, and they get credit for that in their stock market valuation.
Yeah.
Where you look at Rapid7, who has higher growth, but they're not profitable yet, I think they take a little bit of a ding in the public markets. That's the difference between profitability and not profitability.
Wow, and there's a lot there too to think about. I want to get us to the stories. All right, I want to just point something out in this one, and if you've got anything you want to talk about, but this former Yelp COO, how to survive the value of death of the startup. It's got some ideas. To be fair, I like some of them. I don't like others. I wanted to call one out though, because I see this a lot, and this is a real bugaboo for me. Number 4, 50% of staff will hear what you say, so overinvest in internal communication. I'm going to make it a quick soapbox. This is the worst advice I've ever heard. Now, here's what they're trying to say, and if they just said it this way, pay attention to your internal communication. If you're going to invest in anything, invest in the structure so that you can communicate clearly and consistently, and that people have a way for their voices to be heard. What I see most times is people don't do that. And what they'll hear is, right, we did this for maybe the first decade of the century. It was, well, effective leaders communicate effectively. And so I'm the guy who raised my hand and go, what does that mean? Well, like you're effective and stuff. And so then when that didn't take and they tried that for a decade, then we've moved into this whole new shift of, what good leaders do? They over communicate. No, they don't. Because if you're communicating crap, and you're over communicating it, then you're over communicating crap. So if you're creating friction and you're pissing people off and you're confusing them and you over communicate, then guess what? You're totally screwing that up. So if you just say, well, over invest in it, oh, so now I need to have Slack and email and, well, we're Office 365, so we got Yammer too in there. Oh, and then I text message people, and then sometimes I call them on the phone, and then we have our scheduled meetings. I've seen this in startups, and people look around and they go, I don't know what channel I'm supposed to follow. I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to. I don't know how to escalate this, and nobody's listening to me. So all I would say is this is a great concept, but what in my experience, and this is where I spend the bulk of my time looking at straight talk and communication, do people have a voice? Do they have a mechanism to exercise that voice? And when they do, is it actually heard and acted on? If you focus on that, then this is less of a problem. But that's just, I get
part of it's but part of it's culture, right? And it comes from the CEO down. What's
agreed.
The culture in the environment, right? If the CEO is open, has the open door policy, look, this will happen naturally. But
Yeah, and the only challenge
look,
I'll add is because this is talking too about when you scale up to teams of 100, right? When it's 10 to
yeah,
15 people, that does tend to happen. But when you've got 100 people trying to go in 20 different directions, it gets nutty. And so when people say overinvest in communication, what we tend to do is we make it worse. All I would argue is invest in the structure and invest in training people on that structure. Structure gets you substance. Structure is the way you overcome friction. That was kind of my point on it. The rest of the stuff's interesting. This last one, because we got so many stories to get to here, Matt. This was at Burning Man while your startup burns. But basically what it was saying is if you're in a startup and you're running it. So this one was specific to going to Burning Man, but then they called out Ibiza. They called out South by Southwest. The thing I find is I have come across a surprising number of startup founders and startup leaders where they really need to be at the helm of their companies, but man, they are always at a freaking conference. And if you say to them, are you getting value out of the conference? Oh, yeah, I got to be there. Cool. Well, how many leads did you get? Well, I mean, but I got to be there. So I like this to basically say, is your ship running properly? If so, sure, you can check out. Now, this is talking about these big name events where it's like, well, I'm there, so I'm a somebody. But we have this in security too, and I'm always looking at people going, is this the best use of your time, or are you better off working with your team and over investing in communication and doing all that type of stuff? So what's your take on it? Like, how do you find the right balance between, especially as a security startup, where you want to go connect with enterprise leaders?
I have one simple rule. If you're not presenting, don't go.
There you go.
Look, if you're sending your founder and an executive to a conference event and they are not speaking at the event, why are they going? Unless they're trying to do biz dev or something behind the scenes because, they want a strategic alliance relationship, maybe. But
That's
in
what
the
they
early
always tell you
days,
too.
yeah,
That's always their excuse, Matt. Well, I mean, I'm not speaking, but do you know who's going to be there? Do you know all these people I can meet?
Yeah, well, in the earliest of stages, we just went through this discussion with one of the companies I've been working on. I'm like, guys, we're not ready. We're just not ready. Right. Okay, maybe we can get a speaking slot. I can go out and deliver a 20-minute high-level story. I can do it, but is it really worth the investment? I mean, are you going to spend $40, $50, $100,000 to go out to an event for 20 minutes? Then what, right? So
that's the right question.
I'm not a big. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't justify it, right? I could not justify it. I'm like, it's great exposure, but is it at the right time? Can we really leverage that investment the right way? And the answer was no. And if you can't answer those questions honestly, then just don't go. Don't go.
You know what I like about it too? As I'm listening to you, think about it. If you can't, I love this concept of falling in love with the problem publicly. If you're going to go to the event, but you're not able to fall in love with that problem publicly, speaking slot or not, but like you're not really clear on that problem to the point people go, yeah, I got it. How do you do that? Get me in. Then don't go. You're wasting your time. But then I think what you also pointed out is that second point. All right, so they got a guy like you or me. They come. We can tell the story. People are going to be excited about it. Then what? Are you going to follow up on that lead? Are you prepared to work with them? Can you sort out the wheat from the chaff? Who are you looking for? Who's your target? Yeah, if you can't answer those questions, being there to be a somebody, to hope that you're going to meet that one person who really needs what you do and has a check ready. If that happened to you, call us, tell us, send us a note. I'd love to talk to you. But
I'd love to. But yeah, I mean, if you don't have a way to follow up on any lead that comes up, if you don't have a product that's ready to actually POC or GA, I mean, you're just wasting your time and you're wasting money.
Yeah. Let's talk about wasting money. What a horrible way to lead into the startup and the security notes of interest. We'll start with one that people might think is a little interesting, but Slack, $250 million, Series G. They're big growth mode now. $5 billion valuation thing I thought's interesting. And this came up. In fact, I think you and I talked about this during one of the earlier shows. So this was right around the time Amazon went for Whole Foods. The rumor that morning was, oh, look, Amazon's going to buy Slack. They're going to buy Slack, or they're at least going to invest in Slack. And by like Friday afternoon, it was, our bad. They're going to go ahead and buy Whole Foods. And but, they still like Slack. And so they'll throw some cash their way. And that didn't really go so far. April 2016, Slack is valued at $3.8 billion, took a $200 million round, and it just took a $250 million round, $5.1 billion valuation. What do you think?
If you want to talk about definition of unicorns. Here it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting when Amazon was looking at them because look, if you think about where Amazon on the web services side is and the cloud adoption and DevOps and all this other stuff makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Slack's gaining a ton of momentum in the industry as that new engagement platform for communication. And I've been tracking these guys for a little while. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a little high valuation. This is a 20 plus Xer on this valuation. That's huge, right? Look, the only exit now is probably an IPO or, somebody who wants to pay just a boatload for the organization. We'll see where this goes, but
or they're going to get a down round, right? Or it's going to be one of those Slack was sold for an undisclosed amount. Like it's,
yeah,
but
it could be. But
how do you think then Office 365 plays against it, right? Because they've got Yammer, Office 365. I got to tell you, I converted over from the Google and the G Suite apps to Office 365. And the new question I ask myself before I go into anything new, and actually we use Slack over Yammer, is I look at it and I go, okay, is this already included or do I need a different tool to go do it? And I'm starting more and more to find that Microsoft, especially for us smaller businesses, their investments seem to be paying off. Is that a risk to Slack, or no, Slack's in a totally different marketplace and they can sustain that $5 billion valuation?
So I think Slack's in a different market. I think Office 365 is great for companies that are all in with the Microsoft kind of suite. But I see a lot of startups that are not Microsoft based. They're not running Windows. They're not using Office products. They're Amazon. They're Google. Slack fits into that really, really well. Not that Hangouts isn't something to use, but yeah, I don't know if you've ever used Hangouts. It's
I have. It's horrible. It feels like it's the bastard child that they left off to the side. They didn't.
Yeah, I mean, if they could make that thing more bandwidth efficient, I think more people would use it. But look, if you look at every startup, they're running their stuff in AWS. They're a Google Docs customer, and they've all got Slack channels all over the place. I mean, that's the norm in this environment. And the DevOps teams are using it because it's integrated into their other processes. Even if you're a Microsoft shop, your developers probably aren't using Yammer. They're using Slack.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the experience between the two, I like Slack much better, and Slack lets you play with Giphy, and that's just a lot of fun. So, yeah, it's going to be curious to see where that goes. And I think there are security implications. Also, the other news this week, Slack said, hey, it's easier to invite people that aren't in your organization now to participate. So I think we're going to see it's going to be interesting to see how this continues. Another big numbers, McAfee, $4.8 billion in debt. I tell you, I saw the headline and I went, that's interesting. Didn't they just spin out? And so it turns out when you dig into it, it's because the way that they spun out, Intel kept 49%, and Intel essentially floated them alone. So when they spun out, they didn't have audited books. When you don't have audited books, it means getting your financing is really tough. So they gave them a very generous 7% loan. Now, if you're listening at home and you're like 7%, isn't that fine? No, they're not buying a car. It's $2 billion of financing that they needed to repay at 7% interest. And you and I talked before the show. The marketplace is like 1%, 2%. It's a huge premium. Yeah. And so,
I mean, if you think about your bank account, right? If you're making 1% on your bank account, you're lucky. 7% is a high interest rate. If you're buying a house, you're probably at like 4%. Okay, so 7% is still pretty darn high.
Yeah. Now I posited this, and I'm kind of wondering if this was a way to encourage them to get their financing in place, right? Because I could see how you spin off and you got $2 billion out there, and it seems like a lot of money, but even to an Intel, $2 billion hung up in a balance sheet's a lot of money. And if you want this group to get their books audited and to get their stuff squared away and to be a little bit healthier, it's not quite usury at 7%, but at least there's enough of a penalty there that they want to get that off their books. But anyway, that's really what this looks at. It's $4.8 billion in debt. A full $2 billion of that is to repay that. It's financing. It's getting them ready for IPO. It's kind of setting stuff up this way. McAfee, do they stay a player, do you think? Do they trade on their name and the things that they've done over the last couple of years? Or Is this just going to be interesting to watch, but you're not sure much is going to come out of it?
Yeah, obviously when Chris Young went over, part of what he's trying to do is kind of figure out the next version of McAfee, right? And they made some divestitures with MVM, the old Foundstone product,
Yep.
and kind of realigning and right sizing the portfolio. I'll wait to see where it ends up, right? I haven't dug into them lately, right? But look, a lot of people think of Symantec and McAfee kind of in the same boat. They've got the antivirus side, some of the endpoint stuff. They've got Nitro in the portfolio. So depending on kind of where they want to go next, it'll be interesting to see where they go. I'm not sure they're an attractive IPO where they currently are. There's probably other names out there that are really, really attractive for IPOs, and look, they haven't gone. So the financials have to be there. The story's got to be there. I just don't know when somebody like a McAfee could go.
I think that's the key. Go back to a couple weeks ago when we talked about categories. We talked about telling the story, and you pointed out something I think is really important. You've got to be able to deliver on your category and your story today, but you've got to be thinking about what comes next. McAfee isn't McAfee anymore. Whatever they are going forward, this is their opportunity to come tell us a good story. And tapping Chris into that position, we covered that a little bit because I for one, was kind of energized by it. I was like, this is exciting. But, you go to Aller now and you look at his approval rating, it's down significantly. I haven't really heard much from him. I don't see any splashes. I don't see him falling in love with the problem. I don't see anybody from McAfee stepping up and saying, okay, the situation's changed and look at our opportunity. We've got all of this heritage and legacy. We've got these connections with Intel. The chips are changing. The things we can do are different, and this is how we're going to do it. It just kind of feels like they're just shuffling paper around and trying to figure it out. So I'll be curious to see where it goes. On that path, SecureAuth. So SecureAuth does identity, single sign-on identity stuff. They got acquired for $225 million. And OPS, they're going to merge with Core Security. This is one of those things that, I always like to be really positive. So I guess all I'll say is I've always struggled trying to understand what the core of Core Security did. And so SecureAuth is out there, right? Identity's hot. Identity has been confusing for 20 years. And as we proliferate devices and access and applications, and now everything is cloud, identity has, again, popped up, and this becomes a really big opportunity. So SecureAuth merging with Core. So basically K1 stepped in, and they have Toba, right? K1 stepped in. Here's $225 million, and in the one release we've linked to, the CEO of they're going to merge. It's going to be a new company, and the CEO of SecureAuth is going to carry it forward. Stay tuned. It's going to be really exciting. I'm interested.
So this is a manufacturer buyout, right? This is taking two companies, putting them together, going, okay, what are we going to do with this thing now? Core has had an interesting run over the past few years, right? In the early days, they were known for their exploit stuff, moved into what is now known as threat and vulnerability management, but never really got a lot of traction, went through a bunch of changes in that space. Now, here comes SecureAuth. They're going to manufacture the combination. Here's the opportunity, though, right? Because I looked at this a little bit and said, okay, how would these two pieces fit together? If I can start to correlate identity and threat and vulnerability information and start building out more of an intelligent identity authentication set of capabilities, then I think there's something here. Core's got some good pieces underneath that, if leveraged correctly with SecureAuth, could make some improvements in the identity side of some of the challenges that we're facing. That's where I see the potential opportunity. But they're like, just hold on. New company name coming in 2018, so they've got a few months to try to figure aspects of this out.
Like
but that's
that,
where
by the way,
I see the potential fit.
When you do a manufactured buyout like this, are you good with them saying, "Hey, we're coming together, and in 4 months, maybe 5, maybe 6, we'll tell you what our name is"? Like, would you like?
I would have tried to do it up front. I really would have tried
to. This
set
feels
the
like
story up front to say, this is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to become. Stay tuned for more information. But what they basically said is, look, we bought SecureAuth. We're going to combine them with core security, and we're not quite sure what we're going to do with them yet. So wait.
But it's going to be awesome.
I don't think that
Just
helps
trust
either
us.
business right now in the interim, because customers are going to be like,
wait, what?
What does that mean for me for the next 4 months?
I'm looking at the
don't
website.
know.
It's a better approach to securing the enterprise in real time. Network and endpoint security with a strong identity layer. These are words that I don't know about you, but I whoever sent these words to me, I'd say like, right. So you just said a whole bunch of nothing in one shot and stop. Like, I don't understand. But to your point, if we can start to correlate identity with different things that are happening, I mean, we already see people trying to do this with UBA. We already see people now looking at stuff differently. I'll tell you what, I'll leave open. It could be interesting. And maybe we'll even get him on the program. We'll get a chance to talk to him about it. So
yeah, like I said, the opportunity here is to bring the identity dimension into the traditional threat and vulnerability management side. Because to me, the user identity is just another asset. And so it's another dimension of asset. And when correlated correctly, could provide some very interesting capabilities yet to be seen.
So now I'm really curious. I want to see if they acquire anybody else as they're going through it. And I want to kind of see if they define a new category as they go forward, or if they try to pick a default category and try to be better in that category, which I think is going to be really challenging. 225 million. I mean, it's a big number, but it's not huge. So they've got room to grow and room to do stuff differently. Digital Shadows. So we're talking about risk management. Digital Shadows, Series C, $26 million. Now, when you go look at their funding stuff, at least in Aller, looks like they've taken $48 million or more, but some of the rounds, the information here doesn't seem complete as I took a look at it. Now, Aller is crowdsourced, and it's great. I love it. And you know what? I didn't cross-check this one against Crunchbase today, but they started out with an equity round at $8 million, and then they jumped right to a Series B. So it's interesting. I mean, maybe that was their A round. They called it something different. Anyway, $48 million for digital risk management. So it's like what, threat intel, but a little bit different. What do you think? Digital Shadows and a $46 million raise.
This is a weird space for me. I think Forrester's the one who created this digital risk management monitoring space. So what you've got here is Digital Shadows and Risk IQ, maybe a Risk Recon and some of these guys, right? So kind of the external threat side of the equation. So take what most customers have done internally with threat intelligence, and now they're like, oh, okay, let's go look at all your external digital assets and do this, and they call this space digital risk management. There's a lot of stuff in here, and this is where I think the challenge is with some of these guys right now in this thing called DRM is it email, is it web, is it social media, is it a combination of all of those? It's not very clear sometimes to me of what this really, really means, and then you've got various aspects of this. You've got the proof points of the world really on the email and website of this with a little bit of social media. You got Digital Shadows. Looking Glass. There's a number of them, right? Risk IQ seems to be kind of like the de facto leader in the space from a DRM perspective. Looks at as the kind of de facto leader of that category. And so, what's Digital Shadows going to do to kind of differentiate itself over a Risk IQ in the space? I think that's something they have to figure out if they're going to continue to make gains and momentum here.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting point. I'm also curious, too, to see if this is a category that stays or if this is something that transcends and becomes something bigger down the road.
I think it becomes something different. I'm not sure it stays the same. It's kind of confusing to me what DRM really means, but.
No, I was going to say, like, I think that's the point. I think that what we're trying to take a look at, because like if you look at, and I'm sure that they're not all going to say that they're the same, but if you go look at like a Cyber GRX, right, and we've talked to Fred on the program, and you go take a look at this whole concept of a digital supply chain, like and it's funny because we'll always say, well, we're good at the physical supply chain. Yeah, are we? Like, really? We're better at it. Okay. How about on the digital side? Oof. So. Taking a look at this idea of digital risk management and your digital supply chain, and okay, I can see where those things might start at some point coming together.
Well, earlier in the week, and I think Paul and John covered this, is the Cyber GRX BitSite integration, right? Which was
makes
taking
a lot of
the
sense.
BitSite score and bringing it over to enhance that, right? these guys, all of these guys have aspects of kind of what that digital potential risk footprint looks like, that external footprint that potentially is a very interesting integration point for CyberGRX as they continue to look at the whole third-party exchange component. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Those guys all have a potential play, but you can see, what Fred did earlier, late last week actually, with the BitSight integration. Those are continued. Like, what other types of integrations on the CyberGRX side make sense to enhance data collection for understanding the risk of third parties more from an external footprint, to augment what CyberGRX is doing with the internal control reviews and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I've both talked with BitSight and CyberGRX, and I thought it made sense for both of them. Like, if you go look at the way BitSight's trying to explain it, and if you push, and it's funny because I don't think anymore. Like, I would say, so you guys are kind of like a credit reporting agency, and 3 weeks ago they're like, yeah. Now they're like, hell no, we're not. No, don't. No, that's not us. No, we're totally different. ThreatStack, $45 million Series C. So they've done 2 Series A's. And we talked about this, but here's what's interesting. Since 2003, they've done a seed round, 2 A rounds, a B round, and a C round. We've talked about this before. There's a couple different ways to approach your A. One way is that you do an A, you keep the round open. So typically, you've got a valuation, you've got to raise. I want to raise $10 million. And so you might announce when you've got your first $5 million in, and the round stays open, not typically for a year, but maybe for a couple months, and then it closes. And that means all your money's in. Sometimes too, you'll oversubscribe your A round. So your original goal was, I don't know, 8 million. You raised 12, and somehow you thought that made sense to take the money. I always think it's a risk, but that's cool. So you do it. But we see this new trend now where people are taking a second A. Now, to be fair, I don't know if ThreatStack did this. I didn't dig enough into their financials to figure it out. But what you'll see sometimes is I'll do an A, and then, oh yeah, you know what? I didn't really raise enough, and we need a little bit more capital. Or sometimes somebody else wants to jump in, and I don't want to change the valuation. So it's not so much that you reopened the round, although I guess technically you did. You still call it an A in an A round. I always think it's interesting, and so it's probably just some of the stigma from the folks that I've talked to about it. When you see something like that, does it matter to you, or are you kind of more like, where are you at now? 45 million C for a growth. I mean, C should be a growth stage. So at this point, 45 million for a company that's looking at intrusion detection, but they're looking at cloud. Is that enough for them as a Series C? You think?
Or is it too much? Let me play the other side of that for a second, right? I always look at the number of rounds because it starts to give you an idea of, are they spending, are they burning a lot, right? And that's kind of an indicator, right? Because when you go to another round, that means you need funding to continue, right? And so you could see an A, a B, a C, a D. Look, Slack's at a G. And then sometimes you see this thing called an equity round, which is usually a down round, which isn't good typically, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, they need money to stay afloat, but they can't go raise money at a different valuation. So it's typically a down round. So I like to count the rounds just to understand where they are in the process. And so in theory, this is probably a D, even though they call it a C.
Right.
But you got to start looking at the money in, and you got to start thinking about, what's the valuation of this company now?
Yeah.
A $45 million round. Let's just do simple math and say it's a 4Xer, and it's probably much higher than that.
Yeah,
that means $180 million, right? Where are they from a revenue perspective? Are they anywhere in that kind of valuation gap, right? This is one of the things that I take really seriously with some of the smaller startups that I'm working with is, guys, don't take a really big round unless you really need it, because what happens is the perception is sometimes that it kind of blocks you out of a potential strategic acquisition, which I think are valid exits, right? And so when you take a $45 million C round and now you've got $50 million in, to get a decent return, you're looking at a $200 million. If you're not doing at least 20 million in revenue, the math doesn't work, just in general, right? So so that's kind of the digging that you got to do a little bit. So
yeah, I think sometimes people like the number, right? Like they want to project a big number and go, well, I got a big raise, so therefore we're doing awesome. And they're kind of losing sight of, what is that blocking you from? And by the way, how high did you just set that bar? I don't want to talk a lot about it, and we got a couple more here, and then we're going to get to our interview. So EIQ rebrands as Sigilant, 7 million equity round. So as we just said, kind of a down round. man, you go look at their funding history. So since 2009, they've got different rounds, different debt, different equity stuff. We'll see where they go. I want to point out this one. Oh,
Rebrand.
I guess,
here it comes.
yeah, right. I mean, maybe this is it though. That said, look, I'm a believer in second chances. Maybe the rebrand does it. Maybe this is the equity round. They get their stuff squared together. They figured it out. They're doing security operations. They're doing analytics. I mean, this also might just be.
So are a lot of other people. So
I was just gonna say this could just be positioning for the exit, right? So,
yeah.
All right, this one drove me nuts. Evident, $8.8 million Series A, and I was like, Evident. Wait, what? And I looked it up, and I went, oh, that's not the same company. It's not Evident.io. This is Evident ID. We did get time, and this is, I always enjoy it when you and I get a chance to do this. So we're going to have to cycle some of these companies back. You go look at their homepages, and you're like, wait, but what do they do? Like, is their problem clear? Did it capture my attention? And I find most of these companies, they don't. By the way, if you're listing as a vendor, not as a vendor, if you're an enterprise leader, are you doing any better internally? So this one's interesting, right? So it's a cloud-based platform, and it's identifying certifications, criminal, financial background information. A Series A raise is big. It's cloud. I feel like this needs to scale a little bit, so it's interesting. Maybe, I don't know. Thoughts?
Maybe. It's not a horrible round, right? My target round, I don't like A's over 7 million personally, just because I think it locks you out of strategic. So it's not horrible as a round. I guess it just depends on where they are from an adoption and a revenue perspective. Yeah. Is 8.8 the right number for them? I'm not quite sure. I didn't dig into the details on this one, primarily because I did the same thing you did. I scratched my head and went, wait, Evident.io just took a no, wait, this is the wrong company.
No, they did. So yeah, no.
Yeah, wrong company.
All right, so a couple of things that and if we need to, we'll come back to these, and if we need to, we'll talk about them again next week. I'm going to just kind of hit 3 of these fast because this is your area, so you can fill us in. So Aqua Security, $25 million Series B, and they've got that cool word container. I know you track that space. JASK did an undisclosed raise and an unattributed round, which to me feels like maybe someone wanted to get in and they needed to be public about it. But maybe you got some insights on that. And then Capsule 8, $6 million Series A, so they're below your $7 million cap. And they're doing cloud native stuff. There's a lot there. The only other one that's interesting, just because we've covered them a couple times, Bastille just did a $27 million Series B. We're going to dig more into them in the future. I'm going to have to get them on board because I kind of like what they're doing, and I think it's a little different. But let's go back. So Aqua, JASK, Capsule 8, stuff you play in. Any big thoughts here that we need to think about from these?
Yeah, so let me cover JASK quickly because I think what happened here is Stuart McClure wanted in. Stuart got named to the board. I think, and that is kind of the way he got in. I think, based on what I can read, is Stuart wanted in, and he's got a board seat, and I think he brought some capital in as part of that deal as an investment. So I think that's positive for JASK. I covered these guys after Black Hat, very interesting tech. To have somebody like Stuart McClure on the board and an investor, I think is positive for them because, Stuart's, done really, really well with Cylance and other stuff. And so I think that's good for them. I want to talk about container security just a little bit because, this is a space I track a lot. And what you see this week is 2 kind of big announcements. And this follows some big enterprise announcements around containers. And so I just want to do a little bit of education because I think it's interesting. Is this market's going to get a little confusing, I think. And I for listeners, I kind of want to try to help them understand how this all comes together and what these announcements mean. Look, container security is a subset of application security. But container security kind of has a couple different areas that people are focusing on. So the first one is kind of network segmentation. So you've got the Illumios and vArmors and those guys working on network microsegmentation of the containers, right? So that's kind of a whole space in itself. You've got network monitoring folks like Netzel and some of these other guys that are kind of doing monitoring of the container environment more from a network kind of a traditional networking monitoring perspective. You've got then kind of like your deep packet inspection guys. So this is where StackRox and Capsulate, I think, really start to fall as they're trying to do more of this deep packet kind kind of overall monitoring of these cloud native environments, which include containers. That's kind of where those guys fit. And then you have the application centric guys. And right now it's primarily runtime application self-protection vendors, but there's also a couple others over there in really doing some embedded container stuff like Layered Insight, where they're actually embedding instrumentation inside the containers. And so you've got these different buckets coming up. So Aqua, StackRox, Capsulate all kind of fit into this kind of deeper packet inspection kind of thing. And so you got two kind of interesting announcements this week. The other thing to think about with container security, right, is so not just these different market segments, but then approaches. How do they solve it? And there's two predominant approaches in the industry right now. There's a third one emerging, which I want to talk about because I think that's the most interesting for me personally. The traditional way to do this is one is kernel. So you need a kernel level capability. That's what Aqua does. Aqua is installing kind of a kernel level agent to inspect, kind of like they're underneath the container, right? Every container has to spin up a process on the host. So by sitting at the kernel, they can see and inspect these containers coming up. So they kind of sit under the container world. And that's kind of what they're doing. And they are getting some good traction in the industry. Don't get me wrong. I think this raise just kind of validates some of their growth. The second approach that you see is what I call the privileged container approach. So they're running beside containers in the environment where they have a privileged container, and that privileged container can see into the other containers. So that's kind of what Capsulate, StackRox, Twistlock, those guys are doing, and they're running beside. So those are the two predominant approaches, and so you see the privileged container stuff with Capsulate this week, and the kernel level stuff with Aqua this week. The one that's emerging though, which I really like, and this is where I've been doing a lot of consulting work with, is inside the container itself, and that is instrumenting the container inside the container, and it gives you some interesting visibility and portability that some of these other solutions don't have. And that's what's really interesting to me in the space, is because when you think about the technology trends that's going on in the cloud space, think about container as a service. So running this as a platform. Are you going to run kernel agents when you don't have access to the host?
Right.
Probably not. Are you going to run a privileged container when there's other privileged containers across your customers? Maybe not. So what transforms container as a service platforms like ECS or GKE, or serverless computing, right, where Lambda is going to just instantiate something and run it for a period of time and then blow it away? Again, how does a privileged container or kernel agent fit in those environments? So the reason I like this embedded inside the container technology is it's portable across all these different environments. And so if you're looking to streamline both the DevOps and the SecOps side of this equation, then I think this emerging area of inside the container has some very interesting legs. So I watch all
is
this.
This akin, like I'm a big believer that, when we talk about cloud, we've got to translate functionality. So I'm translating concept, but I mean, like I kind of heard stuff like talking about, kernel levels, right? Like we used to talk about like shims and stack stuff versus like operating in a hypervisor and having visibility. And so if you're inside the container, is that functionally like loading an agent on a machine again, or totally different?
No, not. It's different, because loading an agent in a container is basically impossible because there's no operating system.
Well, and that's what I said. But is it
right?
functionally, like functionally? That's what I'm. Is that a way to think about it? Functionally?
Kinda. Yeah, functionally, maybe. I think I'll have to figure out how to.
There's probably a better way. Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then look, we could do a whole session on all of this at some point in the future. But what I'm looking for is technologies that transcend certain market trends, and we've got to think about some of these things differently than the way we've thought about them in the past, right? Look, today, when customers move to containers, they start on-prem, and so they own the infrastructure. Then they move to dedicated instances in the cloud. So they still have access to the endpoints because they're running Kubernetes in a dedicated instance environment. But let's say that I want to move that to GKE or to ECS now. There's a layer that gets taken out in the cloud environments, And what technologies transcend when that happens, when these platform as a services for containers continue to evolve and gain adoption, certain technologies get locked out, I think, in potential cases, because you no longer have these endpoints, or you don't have the ability to run privileged containers anymore. Right now it works okay. I'm looking for those really cool technologies that say, wait a minute, it doesn't matter if serverless computing and container as a service take over or not, my technology still works. So this is an evolving space. It's going to continue to grow, and I think you're going to continue to see more and more announcements in this space.
And that's why, if you're watching and you're in the enterprise today, pay attention to this type of stuff, because we're going to guide you through what to look for, especially when we bring Matt on. We're talking about these types of things. We covered a ton. We're going to come back. We're going to circle back on some of these over the next couple of weeks. And every time we bring Matt back, we're going to do a better job. Well, hopefully there's not going to be 11 freaking stories in a week, and we'll be able to break down some of their pages and start talking about the value, because I think that's where we're going to really be able to help everybody. But up next, we've got Don Pizzette, Tim Broom. They're going to join us again. We're going to talk about IP tools, not IP tools, rather. We're going to talk about IP Pro TV and some of the exciting stuff we got going on. We'll be right back after this break with that interview.